Most surface edits are done by selecting the surface and choosing the appropriate surface edit from the contextual ribbon. However, we will look at the paste surface command, and to do so, we will actually create a surface and paste in other surfaces to make a combined existing ground surface. First, let's look at our Toolspace Prospector tab and notice that we have a detention pond, an existing ground, which is all our survey and topo, and a lake survey, which contains contours. So we want to paste all of these into one large combined existing surface so we can manage it better, and any updates that are done to any of the individual surfaces will update in the combined EG automatically. First, let's go ahead and create a surface. Go to the Home tab, create ground data, Surfaces dropdown, create surface. In our name, we'll give it a combined EG, and we'll give it the default style of 1 foot and 5 foot background contours. Click OK, and now we have a surface. Now typically you can select a surface and use the contextual ribbon. However, since we have no definition in this surface, we'll use the actual definition category right here in the combined EG surface. So let's right click on Edits and go to Paste Surface. When you paste surfaces, it is very important that you do this in the correct order. A good rule of thumb is to always select the larger surface first and then add the smaller surfaces that may overlap into the larger one so it properly clips the surfaces. So first I want to add in the EG, and then I'll click OK. And as you can see, just like that, we now have the EG surface. Again, this is a link to the existing ground surface, and any edits that are done to the existing ground surface will update in the combined EG. Now I can select that surface, go to the ribbon, Edit Surface, and then choose Paste Surface. Now I'll add in the detention pond. Click OK. And now I have the detention pond in the combined EG. Now I'll go ahead and add in the lake survey contours. Select that surface, click OK, and just like that, I now have all three surfaces into one combined surface. Again, the great thing about this functionality is that any changes that are made to any one of those surfaces will update in this surface automatically. Also note, if I need to remove one of the surfaces from the surface definition, I can access it right here or in the surface properties. This concludes this video discussing editing surfaces, pasting surfaces. Most surface edits are done by selecting the surface and choosing the appropriate surface edit from the contextual ribbon. We will now look at some of the additional surface edit tools available. First, let's look at extracting surface data as regular AutoCAD objects. I will select my surface, and in the Surface Tools panel, there's the Extract Objects tool. The surface objects that you can convert AutoCAD objects to are borders and the contours. Let's go ahead and just toggle off the borders, and I'll leave on the major and minor contours. I could pick all, or I could say select from drawing, and then pick the browse button there, and navigate and select some of the contours that I want to extract from the drawing. I'll go ahead and do the same thing here, and pick that same selection set to get the minor contours. Press Enter, and then click OK. And now we have 2D polylines with the elevations applied to those 2D polylines. Again, this is useful for using with other civil engineering products. Let's go ahead and talk about the Move Blocks to Surface command. So I'm going to zoom into this area here, and what I have is something called Civil 3D Multi-View Blocks. What a multi-view block is a block that looks fine in 2D, and when rotated in a different orientation, actually represents a true 3D model. So first I'll select my surface. In the Surface Tools panel, I will click the More Tools option and select Move Blocks to Surface. Before I do so, I want to point out some of the other additional tools here. You have Move Blocks to Attribute Elevation, which will grab the Z value because some blocks will have an attribute that shows the elevation, so you can use that to extract that and then create some 3D information. You can also move text to the elevation. It'll actually read the numeric value in the text and convert that to a point. And you can create a totally separate cropped surface from an existing surface. I'll select this. I'm then prompted to select the blocks in the file that I want to move to the surface, and I'll select all three here, and then I'll click OK. It looks like nothing's happened, but what I will do is I will select one of the blocks, right-click Select Similar, and then I'll select this other block here, which is a transmission tower. Then I'm going to take this into the Object Viewer by right-clicking and going to the Object Viewer command, and what you will now notice, and this is really cool, is it automatically will project those blocks to a surface based on the location of that surface. And so that's really very, very useful for doing any kind of 3D visualization and so on. Let's take a look at another edit command, the Raise Lower Surface command. I'm going to select my detention pond surface, which is included or pasted into the combined EG, and I'm going to raise and lower this surface, and it should automatically update the combined EG. This command from the Edit Surface dropdown is very useful if you need to drop down a surface by a certain elevation and start doing design from there. I'll select the command, and let's just type in -10, press enter, and you'll notice that the contours in the combined EG surface update automatically because I have Rebuild Automatic turned on. There are many additional tools to editing surfaces. Simply select the surface and navigate the contextual ribbon to see additional ones not covered here. This concludes this video discussing additional surface editing tools. Civil 3D has tools that allow you to see any kind of surface analysis that may be necessary during the design process. Some examples of surface analysis are elevation banding, slope arrows, and so on. Let's examine the workflow for displaying surface analyses. We'll first set our surface to display a slope banding style. Before we do so, let's go ahead and look at the style to see how you define any kind of the analysis. If I go to the Settings tab, Surface Category, Surface Styles, here's an existing one called Slope Banding 2D. I'll double-click it to open up the Surface Style dialog box. In the Analysis tab is where you define all of the different types of surface analysis. So I can define the different schemes and settings for directions, elevations, slopes, and slope arrows. So we'll expand slopes, and there's the default settings that will be applied to this surface when this surface style is applied to it. Notice how you can exaggerate the elevations to see a different display of your tin, and so on. Also in the Display tab is where you tell Civil 3D which of the surface analysis you want to display. I'm going to select my surface, go to the Properties palette, and just quickly change it to Slope Banding 2D. And just like that, it does a slope banding analysis. Now, of course, this is probably not exactly what you want. You want to define a specific banding that you need to display for this surface to better help you in your design process. For instance, I only want for this design 3 bandings, 0 to 5%, 5 to 10, and then 10 and above, because based on the geographic location of my project, I am not allowed to design anything in the 10% or greater area. So, with my surface still selected, I will go to the Surface Properties dialog box. There's an Analysis tab, and in the Analysis tab is where you define any of the different analyses and how to customize the actual banding. I'll select slopes, and the ranges that I want are 3. And so here is where you actually add in the analysis you want to run. And just like that, I now have a minimum to maximum slope analysis divided into 3 bands. I'll click Apply to show it, but we obviously want to edit these. To edit these, you simply click once and then kind of click again. So I'll just type in 5% for that. For this one, I want 5 as well. And then I'll change this to 10 for the maximum. And then for the last one here, we simply want 10 and above. So whatever that maximum slope is, we don't really care. It's just basically saying from here to here, we cannot build our site and so on. I want to change the colors because in my opinion, they always seem to be backwards. You want red to be the bottom and you want like a yellow or a green to be the areas where you can build. I'll go ahead and select the red color just by clicking on it. This opens up the Select Color dialog box. And I'll go ahead and we'll select a yellow for 0 to 5. And then for 5 to 10, we want blue. And then for 10 and above, we want red. Click OK. And there is our new surface slope banding. If you want to define a legend table for this surface based on the slope banding, you simply click on the Labels and Tables panel in the Add Legend. So we want a slopes banding table. You obviously want it to be dynamic, so it updates automatically if you change any of the slope banding, and basically define the upper left corner, and you now have a table in your drawing that is reading the slope banding defined in the surface. Let's create another surface style that does the triangles and the slope arrows to see how our surface flows. I'm going to scroll up to the tin editing surface style, and I'm going to right-click on it and select Copy. And for this one, I want to leave on the triangles and the border. I'm going to toggle on slope arrows. I'll go ahead and give this a name, and we'll call this Triangles and Slope Arrows. Then I'll go to the Analysis tab and Slope Arrows, and just look at some of the default settings here. I can change the arrow length that gets displayed. I can change the scheme here if I want it to be blues, greens, etc. So let's go ahead and just change it to blues. And we'll leave the default settings because we're going to actually change them afterwards. So again, just verifying the display tab that we have triangles, the border, and slope arrows. And let's say we may want to rotate this surface's view orientation. So I'll go to the Model tab, and we'll also add in that same visibility. Click OK. And now I'll select my surface and apply that surface style to this surface. Click Apply, and then click OK. And now, if I hit Escape to clear my selection set, I can see a nice general direction of how the surface is flowing. Notice how our roadway is obviously draining on both sides. So surface analysis really helps you analyze your surface to help you better in the design process. This concludes this video discussing surface analysis. Civil 3D provides dynamic labeling functionality. What this means is that any labels you add to Civil 3D that are associated with the Civil 3D object will update automatically. Let's look at this labeling functionality as it relates to surfaces. So if I select a surface first, in the Labels and Tables panel, I have the Add Labels dropdown. I can select these default labels here, or these initial labels. Just so you know, when you do just pick this and it runs the command, it uses the default styles as defined in the feature or command settings within the Settings tab. I recommend you select the Add Surface Labels tool, which opens up a dialog box which allows you to select a possibly different style that you may want. I'll make sure the feature is set to surface, which it does automatically. And let's go ahead and look at the different label types. Let's first look at slope. So these are the default styles that come with Civil 3D, and of course you can add your own. In this case, I just want to do a %. So I will select Add. Again, when you don't know what to do, look to the command line window. It's asking me, do I want a 1-point label or a 2-point label? A 1-point label will simply add that label on top of a triangle, and it will read the slope direction on top of that triangle. And that's it. Let me hit Escape. We'll start that again. If I add a 2-point label, this will ask me for 2 points, which will then sit those 2 points on top of the surface triangles, and whatever the slope is between those 2 points, whether or not they cross different triangles, it does not matter. That is the slope that you will be given. So if I start at the top of the road here and go down, that is the slope from the top of the road here down to this lake area. If I hit Escape here and select it, this is one of the other really cool things about labels, is that they dynamically update based on where you move the label. So as I zoom in here, you'll see that as I move the label along, I'm going down that slope, so of course my slope label will become less and become a little flatter as you get closer to the actual point that is the second point of that label. The same thing applies to the 1-point label, except in this case, I simply move it and it will automatically change the direction and the slope based on the location on the triangle. So that's really very cool, right? Now, what's even cooler about this is the fact that I can use the copy command to simply copy labels wherever I want them to get a nice little analysis of what's going on here. So that's slope labels. Let's look at elevation labels. I'll select the spot elevation label type, and notice how you can do a label style for the actual spot elevation as well as a marker if you so desire. If you don't want a marker, set this to none and you will not get a marker. I'll select that and select elevation only. Some of the default labels are elevation and a rise over run and EL : the actual elevation. I'll just pick elevation only and we'll select add. Because I don't have that surface selected again, it's asking me to select a surface. So I'll select my surface and then simply place that label. Again, the great thing about these labels is that they are dynamically updated. So I can simply move it by picking the grip here. It will automatically adjust the elevation based on where that label is located. And you can also copy these labels as well. One of the other really cool things about any label is I can actually select it, and then what I can do is I can actually edit this label text to have, let's say for this one, just specifically this label here, I want it to have a prefix of EL equals. So in the contextual ribbon, I can select Edit Label Text, and then right from within here, I can actually change any of the properties in this location. So I will go ahead and just type in this field here, EL equals. But notice, I could have added northing, easting, lat long, as long as the coordinate system is defined, etc., to this label and only this label. Click OK, and now I've got that prefix defined in there. If you want to go back to the default label, you can simply click on Clear Label Text and it'll basically go back to the original label styles definition. Of course, you can do contours. So let's see what a contour does. So of course you have existing, minor, and user-defined contours. In this case, I only have major and minor contours. So I will just click Add here, and let's see what it does. I'll simply select at this point there, a contour. And notice how it just puts that in there. I could keep going here if I wanted to, and it'll automatically put the label along that contour. So what really is happening? What's really happening is Civil 3D is simply adding what's called a contour label line. This is a dynamic line that if I were to stretch this across all the contours, it will automatically display the contours along that label line. So that is all that it's doing, is adding a little tiny line across that contour. Now, of course, if you want to do this in a global way, you can do this with the command of contours multiple at interval, and we'll do that in a second here. I want to get rid of all the little tiny contour label lines. Select one, right-click, select similar, and it just selects all of them for me, and then I can just use the delete key, and those labels are gone. So let's go ahead and choose the contour multiple at interval. I'll keep the default styles. Of course, I can change them to whatever styles are available. Click Add, and then because my surface is no longer selected, it's asking me to pick a surface. I'll select it, and then it says Pick First Point. So what it's asking you is to define a line or lines of points to start the contour labeling process. So I just went across all my contours, and then here's the interval that you want, and this is totally up to you. The default is 100. I'll press Enter, and it will automatically add contouring every 100 feet. If you don't get the desired results, or if it's too much, then you can select similar as I did before and delete those contour labels and start over again. All right. So notice how I have, just like that, contour labeling across every 100-foot distance. If I'm displaying too many of the minor contours and I only want the major to display, here's a nice little tip. I'll select one, right-click, select similar, and then what I can do is go to the Properties palette and tell Civil 3D that for the minor contours, I do not want it to display. So I will say false, and just like that, I only have major contours. Just so you know, these contour label lines are still dynamic, and if they were to stretch across other contours, they would actually update the labeling along those contours. This concludes this video discussing surface labels.